What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka NYPrepper. Just wanted to talk to you about nuclear war survival. And you need to ask yourself this question: do you have a nuclear war survival plan? What's your plan if there's a nuclear war tonight or right now? What happens if, as you're watching this video, you get an alert on your phone that there's multiple ICBMs inbound and one of them is going to be landing close to where you live? Do you have a plan, and do you know what to do in that situation? You need to ask yourself this question and answer honestly: do I know what to do if we get nuked? If Putin decides to push the red button, what is my plan? Where am I going to go? How am I going to protect myself and my loved ones from fallout radiation and blast and thermal radiation? What am I going to do? How am I going to survive the aftermath of a nuclear attack or a nuclear war? But before I get into that, I just want to show you guys this beautiful spring day here in northern Pennsylvania, north central PA. It's about 65 degrees right now. It's May 2nd, 2022. The trees are just starting to bud. Beautiful blue sky, not humid at all. This is just the perfect weather in my opinion. May is one of my favorite months because it's not too hot and not too cold. It's just perfect weather. So let's talk about nuclear war and having a plan for nuclear war. Now, I'm not going to get too detailed in this video. I'm going to make a separate video in my How to Survive Nuclear War series about making a nuclear war plan. So that'll be coming out in the coming weeks. But you need to have a plan, guys. You know, you need to have some kind of solid plan on what you're going to do when the nukes start to land, okay? And now is just a great time to think about this with everything going on in the world, and it's just going to get worse and worse as far as tensions go between nuclear powers, mostly between Russia and NATO. And I've talked about this in my How to Survive Nuclear War series. If you haven't seen any of my How to Survive Nuclear War videos, I recommend you check them out. I go in great detail about how to survive nuclear war, and I talk about, you know, the scenarios and the different countries involved. Really, if there's a nuclear war, it's going to be Russia versus the US. There's going to be some involvement with China and some involvement with NATO, but there's not going to be huge involvement there, okay? China has a small nuclear arsenal. The UK and France have small nuclear arsenals. Okay, so it's going to be Russia versus the US. So you need to think about, where are you going to go when the bombs land, when the warheads land, okay? What is your fallout shelter? Do you have a basement in your house? Do you have a basement in your apartment building? If you live in an area where there are no basements because of the water table or the soil, for example, in the South, in Florida and other places, Texas, many structures don't have basements like they do up here in the north. So if you live in an area where there's no basements around, what other types of structures can you use to protect yourself from radiation? Okay, and if you live close to a nuclear target, and I have a list of all the nuclear targets on my website, www.NYPrepper.com. In the blog section of my website, I have a list of every nuclear war target in the United States. If you live near a nuclear war target, you also need to think about protecting yourself from overpressure and thermal radiation. And overpressure is just a fancy word for blast, okay? When that bomb goes off, depending on how close you are to the bomb, there's going to be different blast effects, from buildings being completely leveled to some buildings surviving and others being completely leveled. So you need to think about how close you are to a nuclear target. Are you within the blast zone? Okay, are you going to get affected by the blast wave, the overpressure? Are you going to get affected by the thermal radiation, which just means heat? Okay, after a bomb goes off, a nuclear bomb, there's a tremendous amount of heat that can cause third-degree burns as far away as 20 miles from the detonation point. So for example, if you have a nuclear warhead go off in Lower Manhattan and you live in White Plains, New York, you could still get a third-degree burn possibly from that warhead, depending on the power of the warhead. So these are things you need to think about. Are you close to the blast? Are you close to the detonation point? Okay, if so, how close are you? Are you within the severe damage zone? Are you within the moderate damage zone? Are you within the light damage zone? Okay, I talk about this in my How to Survive a Nuclear War series. Okay, the severe damage zone, if you're in that area, the chances of you surviving are basically almost zero. Even if you can get underground into a subway tunnel or something like that, all the big buildings are going to collapse on top of you and you're going to be stranded underneath rubble. So you don't want to be in the severe damage zone, which is basically within 1 to 3 miles of the detonation point for most warheads. And beyond the severe damage zone, which can go from 3 miles to up to 10 or 15 miles, depending on the size of the warhead, you have the moderate damage zone. Okay, moderate damage zone, maybe half of the structures will be intact and the other half will be destroyed. And then beyond the moderate damage zone, you have the light damage zone, where there's going to be very minimal damage to structures. You may just have windows blow out or some roofing or siding getting torn off. It's very survivable. If you're in the moderate or light damage zone, it's very survivable. If you're in the severe damage zone, it's not survivable. So you need to think about that. You need to think about fallout contours. If you're, let's say, 100 or 200 miles away from the nearest nuclear war target, you might think you're safe, but guess what? You're not. Okay, the fallout is still going to reach you, and chances are most of the United States is going to be blanketed in fallout radiation during a nuclear war. So even in the most remote locations of the United States, far away from cities and nuclear war targets, you're still probably going to get some kind of fallout radiation. All right, it might not be as heavy as somebody who lives downwind from our nuclear missile silos in North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming, or someone who lives downwind from a major US city. But there's just so many targets for nuclear war in the United States. Chances are you're going to be downwind from something, okay? And even if you're not near one of those targets, you could still be in one of the fallout contours of that target, okay? It could be a light fallout contour or moderate fallout contour. You're still going to get some fallout. And in addition to the fallout, you got to also think about electromagnetic pulse. You're going to have at least 500, if not 1,000 or more nuclear detonations going off across the country. That's going to destroy our power grid, because every single warhead that is detonated generates an electromagnetic pulse in the surrounding area around that warhead where it was detonated. So the grid is most likely going to be down, and when the grid is down, people are going to go crazy. There's not going to be any running water in a lot of the major cities. Garbage is not going to be picked up. Sewage systems are not going to be working. Forget about the supply chain, that's going to be gone. So not only do you have to survive the immediate effects of the bomb itself, the warheads, okay, the blast, the thermal radiation, the ionizing radiation, which includes fallout. You have to survive all those things, and if that's not enough, you're going to have to survive the aftermath, okay? Grid down, okay? There's not going to be any power for at least 6 months. You can bet on that. Minimum 6 months to a year after a large nuclear attack like that, where hundreds of warheads are detonated inside of our country. So you know, you're going to have a lot of panicking people. You're going to have starvation. It's going to be a mess. So you have to think about all these things. What's your plan, okay? And I know as preppers, I'm sure a lot of you guys are already prepared for food shortages, grid down situations, but can you survive the immediate effects of the warheads when they detonate? Because if you can't survive the immediate effects of those warheads, then you have no chance of surviving the aftermath of the nuclear war, okay? If you die from radiation poisoning, or you get crushed by rubble, or you get third-degree burns across your whole body, it doesn't matter that you stocked up for 2 years of a grid down event. All that's going to be for naught, because you're not going to survive the immediate effects, okay? So you need to think about not just the aftermath and the long-term survival after a nuclear war, which most preppers are prepared for that. You know, most preppers have a few months of food and stockpiles of ammo and all that stuff, right? But most preppers are not ready to deal with the immediate effects of a nuclear blast near them, or an entire nuclear attack on our country where hundreds of warheads are detonated across our country. So you need to think about that. Have a plan. Okay, where are you going to go to protect yourself from the immediate effects of the warheads being detonated? All right, the fallout, the blast, the thermal radiation, all right, the EMP effects. You need to think about where you're going to go to protect yourself immediately from those effects. And then you need to think about how are you going to get from your fallout shelter or your bomb shelter back to your supplies where you have all your preps, okay? So it's something to think about. I'm not saying that you need to panic and, you know, start building a fallout shelter, you know, in your basement, which I recommend. You know, if you have a good solid basement and you have plenty of space in there, I highly recommend you build a permanent fallout shelter made of 4x8 by 16-inch solid concrete blocks. Anybody can do it. It's very easy. And there's many plans on the internet on how to do that. And I highly recommend every prepper have that in their basement. You know, you can use it as a separate room for storing your preps. And in addition to that, it'll be your fallout shelter. And you can also use it as a safe room as well. If marauders come, you can go down into that shelter and you can hunker down in there. But you need to think about this. What's your plan? How are you going to survive the immediate effects of the warheads being detonated across our country? Okay, hundreds of warheads. It may not be hundreds. It could be a limited strike. They might hit a few cities. Okay, even then, even if they hit 3 or 4 big cities in our country with 1 megaton warheads, you know what kind of effects that's going to have on the power grid, on the supply chain, on the economy. But if they go all out, which is what they would most likely do, because if they're going to go to the trouble of nuking America, they're going to make sure that they go all the way, because our counterattack is going to be absolutely devastating and going to completely rubble them. So they're going to make sure that they make their attack count, and they're going to hit us hard. They're going to hit us with hundreds of nukes, okay? So think about that. Check out my videos. Form a plan, okay? If you don't have a basement, if you live in an area where there are no basements, you need to think about alternatives, okay? And I talk about that in my How to Survive Nuclear War videos. I talk about how to improvise a fallout shelter, you know, from sandbags, digging trenches, using furniture, what materials are good for that, sand, dirt, concrete blocks. I talk about all of that in my videos. And also I talk about what kind of existing structures you could use as a fallout shelter so you don't have to build one at the last minute, because chances are it's going to be near impossible for you to suddenly throw together a fallout shelter after there's 500 nuclear warheads detonated in our country. Okay, it's not going to be that easy. So that's why you got to think about this now, guys. You don't want to be panicking when it happens. You know, there's many structures in this country that are suitable as a fallout shelter. Chances are there's one near you or multiple structures near you. I don't care where you live, even if you live in the smallest town, I guarantee you can find some kind of structure that you can use as a fallout shelter, whether it's a school, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a bank. Okay, there's multiple different structures that are built really solidly that you can use as a fallout shelter. Apartment buildings, all kinds of stuff, all right? And I talk about that in my videos, but I want you guys to just think about what your plan is, okay? Also, you're gonna need at least 2 weeks of food and water with you in your fallout shelter. Wherever you're gonna shelter, you're gonna need to have enough food and water for up to 2 weeks or more, okay, while you wait for the radiation to subside. You're gonna need a way of emptying your human waste. You're gonna need food, you're gonna need water. So think about these things, guys. Make a plan. But that's pretty much it, guys. Check out my How to Survive a Nuclear War series. I'll leave a link at the top of this video. And also check out my nuclear war survival playlist. I have all of my nuclear war survival videos there. Check out my website, www.NYPrepper.com, for all kinds of nuclear war survival references, including a list of targets, nuclear war targets in the United States. And I'm going to be uploading a list of targets in Canada and Europe soon to my website. I already did a video on nuclear war targets in Canada, and I'll leave a link to that video at the top of the screen here. But that's pretty much it, guys. Take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.